A man stands alone in an open, sunlit field, breathing heavy over the shattered body of his younger brother. The wind stops moving through the grain. The dirt beneath his bare feet is doing something it has never done since the week of creation. It is drinking human life. But watch what the text does when the Creator arrives to break the silence. The Lord does not ask where the body is hidden, nor does he simply mourn a single life taken. He speaks of a sound rising out of the dirt, and the English translation hides a jarring linguistic anomaly right in the middle of the accusation. Genesis 4:10 inches, the King James Version reads, "And he said, What hast thou done? The voice of thy brother's blood crieth unto me from the ground." Stop right there. The mystery here is not just that the ground is speaking, but what exactly is generating the sound. Strip away the English, read the original Hebrew, and the word used for Abel's blood is not singular, it is plural. The word is dime, literally translating to bloods. Why does the Hebrew text use a plural noun for blood when describing the voice crying from the ground? And what exactly was the earth swallowing that gave it the power to act as a prosecuting witness? Picture it. The first murder in human history is not recorded as a quiet slipping away, but as a violent physical fracture that alters the very soil of the earth. Genesis 4:8 tells, "And it came to pass, when they were in the field, that Cain rose up against Abel his brother, and slew him." Canonical Genesis leaves the mechanics of that moment terrifyingly brief. It gives us the act, and then it gives us the aftermath. It leaves a massive, silent gap between the lethal strike and the divine interrogation. A gap where a man tries to hide what cannot be hidden. To understand the sheer panic in that field, and the desperate attempt to silence what was spilling into the dirt, we must look to an ancient Jewish writing called the Book of Jasher. Jasher expands this exact window of time, detailing the frantic, terrified moments before the Lord's voice breaks from the heavens. It shows us a killer who suddenly realizes that the evidence of his crime is not just pooling on the surface. It is being actively, hungrily consumed by the earth itself. The dirt is taking possession of the crime. See the scene. The body is down, the damage is done, but the blood is not just resting on the grass. The ground is opening to receive it, and as it sinks into the dark soil, it begins to make a sound, not a quiet, metaphorical feeling of guilt. A literal, deafening frequency that breaches the throne room of heaven. The King James says, "The voice of thy brother's blood crieth unto me." The Hebrew word translated as voice is kol. It does not just mean a spoken word, it means a sound, a thundering noise, an undeniable roar. Read that again. The blood is roaring. One man died, one body fell. But a multitude of voices began screaming from the dirt, demanding an audience with the Creator. Deme. Bloods, plural. This is the anomaly we cannot ignore. It was not just Abel who was struck down in that field. The ground was swallowing something much larger, a theft so vast it required a plural noun to contain its violent weight. But if Abel was a single man, a young shepherd who had never fathered a single child, whose voices were joining his in the dark soil, the field is no longer silent, and the dirt is vibrating with the cries of a multitude that never existed. The true weight of that plural Hebrew word is buried in the reality of what the fatal strike actually stole. Who are the missing voices roaring from the ground? The soil at the edge of the known world is saturated. The Creator looks down at the man standing in the field and issues the terrifying declaration found in Genesis 4:10. "The voice of thy brother's blood crieth unto me from the ground." We have established the Hebrew anomaly, deme, bloods, plural. But why does the grammar break here? To understand the sheer magnitude of this plural noun, we can look to the ancient Aramaic translations of the Hebrew Bible known as the Targums. Specifically, Targum Pseudo-Jonathan, an ancient Jewish paraphrase, read aloud in the synagogues to explain the Torah to the common people. When the ancient readers reached Genesis 4:10, they did not just say blood. They translated the hidden weight of the Hebrew directly into the ears of the listeners. The Targum interprets the verse this way: "The voice of the blood of the multitudes of the righteous who were to arise from thy brother, cry against thee before me from the earth." Read that again. The multitudes of the righteous. Cain did not just end a single life. He severed a timeline. Abel was a young man. He had no children. He died empty-handed in the dirt, but encoded in his physical body was a lineage meant to stretch forward into the millennia. Men, women, generations of shepherds, builders, and worshippers who were supposed to breathe the air of the early earth. When the fatal strike landed, it did not just kill the man, it violently erased the entire world that was meant to come from him. Picture it. The ground is opening to receive the physical fluid of a single shepherd. But in the spiritual reality, the earth is swallowing the phantom lives of an entire civilization. The voice crying from the dirt is not a solo melody. It is a choir of the stolen. It is the roar of the unborn, demanding a vindication for a life they will now never get to experience in the flesh. This is the concept of stolen generations. Same field, same blood. But the crime is infinitely larger than the English translation can hold on its own. I hold this ancient Aramaic reading as their preservation of the mystery, not as a replacement for the canonical text, but as a lens to see exactly what the Hebrew plural dime was demanding. The Lord is not just prosecuting a man for the murder of a brother. He is prosecuting a man for the murder of thousands. And Cain? Cain is standing in the physical silence, completely unaware of the deafening spiritual frequency vibrating beneath his feet. He only knows that his brother is no longer moving. He only knows that the evidence is glaring under the open sky. The canonical text leaves the immediate aftermath blank, jumping straight from the murder to the divine confrontation. But the dirt was already pulling the blood down. The crime scene was actively altering itself. There is a window of time between the lethal blow and the voice of God. A gap of sheer, unadulterated panic. The killer is alone with the body, and the ground is drinking the evidence. To see what happened in those frantic, silent hours, we have to look outside the canon to another ancient record, one that details the exact mechanics of the very first cover-up. The first murder required the first grave, and the killer had absolutely no blueprint for how to hide a shattered human body. But if the ground was already acting as a vocal witness, how desperate was Cain's attempt to force the evidence out of sight? The adrenaline is fading under the open sky. The man is alone with a shattered body, and for the first time in the history of the world, someone has to figure out how to hide a corpse. Cain has no frame of reference for death, much less a burial. There are no graves on the earth, but he knows his parents are somewhere nearby, and the evidence of his violence is pooling on the grass. The Book of Jasher, mapping the immediate panic of this aftermath, gives us the physical mechanics of the very first cover-up. Jasher records that Cain was suddenly terrified of Adam and Eve discovering what he had done. He did not run. He dug. And Cain hastened and dug a hole in the field, and he put his brother's body in it, and he returned the dust over it. Picture it. The frantic tearing of the soil, the dragging of dead weight, the desperate packing of the dirt to make the ground look exactly as it had an hour before. Cain is using the earth as a vault. He believes the dirt is mute. He thinks if he can just get the physical trauma below the surface, the timeline will correct itself and the silence will return. but sit with the profound reversal happening in this soil. In Genesis 2, the Creator gathered the dust of the ground, breathed into it, and pulled a living soul up out of the earth. Here, in Genesis 4, a man takes a living soul, violently knocks the breath out of it, and forces it back down into the dust. A total, mocking inversion of creation. Cain thinks the dirt is his accomplice, but watch what the canonical text does when the Creator arrives. The Lord does not just bypass the hiding spot, he indicts the hiding spot itself. Genesis 4, 11 inches, the KJV reads, "And now art thou cursed from the earth, which hath opened her mouth to receive thy brother's blood from thy hand." Stop right there. The earth opened her mouth. This is not passive language. This is an active, terrifying personification. The scripture does not say the blood simply soaked into the dirt through natural absorption. It says the earth acted as a consumer. It actively swallowed the plural bloods, the dime of the stolen generations. By forcing his brother into the soil, Cain did not bury a secret. He turned the earth into his primary prosecuting witness. The dirt was never designed to digest human life. It could not contain the screaming anomaly of a murdered lineage. It held the frequency of the unborn, the multitudes of the righteous who would now never breathe, and it broadcast their roar straight into the throne room. The grave Cain dug was not a silencer. It was an amplifier. I hold Jasher's account of the burial as one tradition's record, but it aligns perfectly with the horrific reality of the canonical curse. Cain walked away from that freshly packed dirt thinking he had won. He did not realize the ground beneath his feet was already testifying against him. The earth swallowed the blood. The earth became the witness. But this raises a much darker mechanical question about the crime scene itself. Cain had no sword. There was no forged bronze, no iron blades, no manufactured weapons of war. What exact instrument did a farmer use to shatter the human frame? Look at the hands of the first killer. Genesis 4:2 tells us exactly what Cain was before the fracture. And Cain was a tiller of the ground. He spent his life reading the soil, commanding the dirt, and pulling life out of the dust. He knew the earth better than any man alive. When the violent fracture occurred in the field, he did not reach for forged metal. There were no iron blades. There were no manufactured weapons of war. He reached for the only element he had ever mastered. Canonical Genesis gives us the murder, but it leaves the exact instrument of death completely blank. It simply says Cain rose up. But the ancient mind did not leave this blank. They preserved the mechanics of the strike. There is an older Jewish text, the Book of Jubilees, called by the early church the Little Genesis, kept whole for centuries inside the Ethiopian Bible. When Jubilees records this moment in its 4th chapter, it does not just give us a theological summary. It gives us the exact physical object used to sever the timeline. Jubilees states that Cain struck his brother with a stone. Sit with the dark, heavy irony of that object. Cain did not bring a foreign, unnatural weapon into the field. He weaponized the field itself. He reached down, tore a piece of the earth free, and used it to force his brother's physical body back into the dirt. The ground supplied the very instrument of its own defilement. The earth provided the anvil, and the earth provided the hammer. Now look closely at the precise phrasing the Creator uses when he arrives at the crime scene in Genesis 4:11. "And now art thou cursed from the earth, which hath opened her mouth to receive thy brother's blood from thy hand." Stop right there. From thy hand. The Lord is specifically indicting the physical transfer. The dime, the plural bloods of the stolen generations, did not just leap from Abel's veins into the soil. They coated the stone. They stained the calloused hands of a farmer. And they dripped directly from the tiller's fingers into the waiting mouth of the earth. The dirt drank the evidence straight from the hand of the man who used to cultivate it. Jubilees takes this physical object, the stone, and weaves it into the ultimate law of ancient retribution. According to Jubilees 431, centuries later, Cain would meet his own violent end when his stone house collapsed on him. The text reads, "For with a stone he had killed Abel, and by a stone was he killed in righteous judgment." I hold this as their telling, an ancient Jewish understanding of perfect justice, not as canonical fact. But watch how seamlessly it fits the mechanical reality of the Genesis narrative. The man who weaponized the earth to hide his crime is ultimately crushed by the earth. The weapon was stone. The witness was dirt. The crime was the theft of a multitude. But the curse that follows in the canonical text does something entirely unprecedented. It tells us that the dirt was not just an innocent bystander. By swallowing the blood, the earth itself was fundamentally altered. Cain weaponized the soil, and the soil swallowed the timeline. But the interaction between the two did not end when the dust settled. The canonical text reveals a terrifying physiological shift that takes place when the earth is forced to act as a premature grave. What exactly happens to the ground when the Creator declares that its mouth has been opened? The Lord does not just hand down a sentence in that field. He announces an eviction. Listen closely to the exact phrasing of the judgment in Genesis 4:11 and 12. The Creator looks at the man whose hands are still coated in the dust of the first grave and says, "And now art thou cursed from the earth, which hath opened her mouth to receive thy brother's blood from thy hand. When thou tillest the ground, it shall not henceforth yield unto thee her strength." Stop right there. Look at the preposition. The text does not say Cain is cursed by God on the earth. It says he is cursed from the earth. The Hebrew phrase is min ha'adama. The curse is literally emanating out of the soil itself. The dirt has become the active agent of his punishment. To see how terrifying this shift is, cross-reference it with the judgment of his father. When Adam fell in Genesis 3, the Lord told him, "Cursed is the ground for thy sake. The soil would produce thorns and thistles." Adam would have to sweat and bleed to pull a harvest out of it, but the earth would still eventually feed him. That is not what happens to Cain. For Cain, the master of the field, the earth does not just become difficult, it becomes hostile. "It shall not henceforth yield unto thee her strength." Read that again. The earth possesses a strength, a life-giving, molecular power to germinate seed and sustain human existence. And the text says, the ground is now actively choosing to withhold that strength from one specific man. Picture it. Cain drives his calloused hands into the soil, the same dirt he has worked his entire life, and the earth physically recoils. It locks its nutrients away. It barricades its moisture. It refuses to participate in anything his fingers touch. Why? Because of what he forced it to swallow. By weaponizing a stone and violently packing the dime, the plural bloods of the stolen generations into the ground, Cain fundamentally altered the physiology of the dirt. The earth was forced to act as a premature tomb for a multitude that should have been walking its surface. It became saturated with the screaming frequency of the unborn, and because of that contamination, the soil developed a violent, permanent allergy to the man who defiled it. I offer this as one reading of the text's deep mechanics, a way to see the sheer weight of the Hebrew grammar. This was not a passive barrenness. The ground shut its mouth to the killer, but it did not spit the blood back out. The physical elements of the crime scene eventually settled. The dirt hardened. The sun set on the first murder, and Cain was driven away as a fugitive and a vagabond, severed from his element forever. He walked away from the field, leaving the physical body of his brother behind. But what happened to the voices? The plural roar of the stolen lineage did not evaporate when Cain left the territory. The earth was still holding them. They had crossed the boundary from the living to the dead, and the canonical text goes silent on where that specific roaring frequency actually went. The earth has locked its doors to the killer, but it is still holding the victims. To find out where that deafening cry went after the field grew cold, we have to step out of the canonical borders and travel with a prophet who was given a terrifying tour of the ancient dead. Where did the earth put the spirit of the first man murdered? We leave the physical field in the east. We move into the unseen architecture of the ancient dead. To follow the frequency of that deafening roar, we have to look to First Enoch, an ancient Jewish writing preserved whole in the Ethiopian Bible. In its 22nd chapter, the text pulls the veil back on a location that canonical Genesis hints at but never fully maps. Enoch is taken on a visionary journey to the west, to a great and high mountain composed of hard rock. Inside this mountain are 4 hollow places, deep, wide, and perfectly smooth. And it is completely dark. This is the holding place of the dead. It is the vault where the souls of men wait for the final judgment. But as Enoch walks through this massive, silent architecture, the silence is broken. He hears a sound. It is a solitary spirit, and it is not resting. It is screaming. First Enoch 22:5 describes it like this: I saw the spirit of a dead man making suit, and his voice went forth to heaven and made suit. Stop right there. Making suit. This is not the passive crying of a victim in pain. This is a legal term. The spirit is litigating. It is acting as a prosecutor, demanding an audience with the judge of the universe, and the volume of the accusation is piercing the ceiling of the underworld. Enoch is terrified. He turns to the holy angel Raphael, who is guiding him, and asks, this spirit, whose voice goes forth and makes suit to heaven, whose is it? Raphael's answer bridges the hollow mountain directly back to the blood-soaked dirt of Genesis 4. The angel replies, this is the spirit which went forth from Abel, whom his brother Cain slew. See the scene. The physical body is trapped in the defiled soil of the first grave. The killer has fled into the wilderness. But the spirit of the murdered shepherd is standing in the dark hollows of the earth, refusing to be quiet. I hold this text as one tradition's record, a profound preservation of how the ancient mind understood the afterlife, not as canonical doctrine. But watch how flawlessly it aligns with the KJV backbone. Genesis 4:10 declares, the voice of thy brother's blood crieth unto me from the ground. The Hebrew word for that cry is tza'ak. It is not a whimper. It is a shriek of deep distress, a demand for immediate intervention. Enoch simply shows us the other side of that exact same cry. The dirt drank the plural bloods, the deme, but the hollow mountain took the spirit, and in that mountain, Abel became the mouthpiece for the stolen generations. The timeline was severed. The multitudes were robbed of their breath, and Abel is standing in the dark, leveraging the legal weight of his stolen lineage to demand a reckoning. He is not just mourning his own death. He is actively prosecuting the man who erased his future. But Enoch's vision does not stop with the identity of the screaming spirit. The angel Raphael reveals exactly what Abel is demanding from the throne room. The litigation is not a general cry for justice. The spirit has a very specific, terrifying requirement for the blood debt to be settled. What exact verdict is the first murdered man demanding from the hollow mountain? Deep inside the smooth, dark architecture of the hollow mountain, the spirit of the first murdered man is not at peace. He is litigating, and his demand is terrifying. Watch what the angel Raphael tells Enoch in First Enoch 22:7. He does not say Abel is simply asking for his killer to be punished. He reveals the exact terms of the lawsuit being filed. In the court of heaven. And he maketh suit against him till his seed is destroyed from the face of the earth, and his seed is annihilated from amongst the seed of men. Stop right there. Total genetic erasure. Abel is not demanding an eye for an eye. He is demanding a bloodline for a bloodline. He is standing in the holding place of the dead, prosecuting the man who forced him into the dirt, and his verdict requires that every single descendant of his killer be systematically wiped off the map. Why? Because of the demi, the plural bloods. Remember the anomaly hidden in Genesis 4. Cain did not just shatter one physical body. He swallowed a timeline. He violently erased the unborn multitudes of the righteous that were supposed to breathe the air of the early earth. Perfect ancient justice requires a perfectly balanced scale. If my seed is annihilated from the earth, then his seed must be annihilated from amongst the men. Sit with the sheer weight of that demand. A single spirit echoing through a mountain of stone, asking the judge of the universe to erase an entire branch of humanity. I offer this as one tradition's record of the unseen realm, a window into how the ancient mind understood the terrifying symmetry of divine justice. But you do not have to rely on Enoch alone to see why this demand was necessary. Canonical Genesis shows us exactly what happens to the seed of Cain. Look at the descendants listed at the end of Genesis 4. The violence in that first field did not stay in the soil. It infected the lineage. It multiplied. 7 generations later, the bloodline produces a man named Lamech. Read Genesis 4:23 and 24. And Lamech said unto his wives, Ada and Zillah, hear my voice. Ye wives of Lamech, hearken unto my speech. For I have slain a man to my wounding, and a young man to my hurt. If Cain shall be avenged sevenfold, truly Lamech 70 and sevenfold. Read that again. Lamech does not hide his crime in the dirt. He writes a song about it. He boasts to his wives that he has shattered a young man, and then he weaponizes the very mercy the Creator showed his ancestor. He claims that if God protected Cain with a sevenfold vengeance, he will protect himself with a 77-fold vengeance. The seed of Cain has turned murder into a monument. This is what the spirit in the hollow mountain is screaming about. Abel knows that the fracture he suffered in the field was only the beginning. The stone that struck him was the blueprint for a civilization of violence, a spreading corruption that will eventually fill the entire earth until the waters of Noah are required to wash the globe clean. The cry of the Demei is not just about the past. It is a desperate warning about the future. But we cannot stay in the mountain of the dead. The spirit is litigating, and the seed of Cain is multiplying. To understand the final, lingering weight of this mystery, we have to leave the hollows of Enoch and return to the sunlit dirt where this fracture began. We must go back to the cursed ground. What is the true, unending reality of the field that swallowed the first blood, and why is that soil still speaking today? Go back now to the open, sunlit field where this script began. A man stands alone, breathing heavy over the shattered body of his younger brother. The wind stops moving through the grain. The dirt beneath his bare feet is doing something it has never done since the week of creation. You have read that scene 100 times. But today, the physical landscape of that field is entirely different. You know now exactly what the dirt is doing. It is not a passive absorption. The earth is opening its mouth. The calloused hands of a farmer are dripping with the Demei, the plural bloods of a stolen civilization. The ground is actively swallowing a timeline, taking possession of a multitude that will now never breathe the air of the early earth. Genesis 4:11 is not dark poetry. It is a literal crime scene report. And now art thou cursed from the earth, which hath opened her mouth to receive thy brother's blood from thy hand. Read that again. The earth became a consumer. The farmer did not just strike a shepherd. He reached into the soil, weaponized a stone, and used the earth as a hammer to force a living soul back into the dust. And because of that violent inversion, the ground developed a permanent, physiological allergy to the man who defiled it. The physical dirt and the unseen hollow mountain now hold the two halves of the very first murder. The soil took the blood. The dark rock of the west took the spirit, and in that holding place of the dead, the stolen lineage refused to be quiet. Abel stood in the dark, leveraging the legal weight of his unlived generations, demanding the total erasure of the man who severed his future. The KJV gave us the anomaly. The Book of Jasher gave us the panic of the burial. Jubilees handed us the stone. And First Enoch pulled the veil back on the terrifying litigation echoing in the underworld. I offer this as one reading, a careful bridge between ancient Jewish memory and the canonical text, not as the final word. Test it the way the Bereans tested everything. But a massive piece of this mystery remains deliberately open. The scripture tells us the earth opened her mouth to receive the blood. It tells us the ground cried out to the throne room, but it never records the earth giving that blood back. The ground is still holding the physical weight of that original theft. Cain walked away from that field a fugitive. He left the stone. He left the freshly packed dust. He thought the dirt was a silent vault. He did not know that by burying his brother, he had turned the earth into a prosecuting witness that would outlast his entire lineage. The dirt remembers the taste of the first defilement, and the soil of the earth is still a massive, silent graveyard of what could have been. If you made it to the end of this journey, comment the word watched and subscribe to the channel. Send this video to one person who loves the deep mysteries of Genesis but has never heard the roar of the plural bloods. The first grave was not dug to hide a man, but to bury a multitude, and the ground has never stopped crying.